The day Dominique Ashford realized she was being sabotaged, she was sitting in a hospital waiting room with a styrofoam cup of cold coffee and a folder full of shredded dreams. She didn't know it yet. That's what made it so cruel. If you've ever built something with your bare hands, something that came from nothing but your own mind and your own sweat, then you already know what this story is going to cost her before it gets better. Hit that subscribe button now, and if you've ever loved someone who turned that thing into a weapon against you, then you already know that the worst betrayals don't announce themselves. They arrive wearing cologne and holding your hand. But here's what the betrayers always forget. The very thing they destroy becomes the foundation of everything you build next. Stay with this story, because what happens to Dominique Ashford over the next 4 years is the kind of thing they don't teach in business schools, but should. Dominique grew up in Decatur, Georgia, in a house that smelled like pressing combs and blue magic. Her mother, Vivian, did hair out of the kitchen on weekends. Nothing official, nothing licensed, just the steady parade of women through the back door with their $20 and their gossip and their trust. Dominique learned to section and detangle before she learned long division. By the time she was 14, she was braiding on her own, charging $8 a head, reinvesting every cent into better tools. She had a gift. Not just the technical skill, everyone could learn that, but the eye. The way she could look at a woman's face and know exactly what her hair needed to become. That wasn't something you could teach. That was something you either carried or you didn't. When she was 22, she enrolled at the Atlanta Institute of Cosmetology on a partial scholarship she'd hustled for 6 months to secure. She worked nights at a hotel front desk to cover the rest. She slept 4 hours on good days. She didn't complain. She had a plan. The plan was specific. Graduate, apprentice under someone established, save aggressively for 3 years, then open her own salon in Buckhead, the kind of neighborhood where the clientele expected excellence and paid accordingly. Not a single chair in a shared booth space. A real salon, multiple stylists, a branded product line of her own formulation, the full infrastructure of a beauty empire, built brick by brick. She had spreadsheets, she had pitch decks, she had a business name, Lumiere Beauty Group, that she'd chosen at 19 and protected like a secret. She had everything. And then she met Trevon Whitmore. Trevon wasn't flashy in the way that should have warned her. He wasn't the man who showed up in a leased Benz with rented jewelry. He was worse. He was the man who showed up with opinions about her ambitions, about her timeline, about what she was capable of. He was 31 when they met at a mutual friend's barbecue in Smyrna. He managed logistics for a mid-sized distribution company in Kennesaw, had a condo in Midtown, and spoke with the particular confidence of a man who had never failed publicly. He thought this meant he understood success. He didn't understand it at all. He'd simply never been tested. Dominique should have noticed the small things earlier. The way he'd laugh when she talked about her product line. Not mockingly, not exactly, but with this light dismissive sound, like an adult watching a child describe their imaginary restaurant. The way he called her plans cute. The way he used the word realistic as a weapon, always prefacing his doubts with it. Realistically, Dominique? Realistically, babe. She told herself it was concern. She told herself he was grounded. She told herself that someone who pushed back was better than someone who just cheered. She was wrong about all three things. They moved in together 18 months into his Midtown condo because it made financial sense. Her money could go directly into her business fund instead of rent. That was how she framed it to herself. She was always looking for the angle that let her keep building. By then, Lumiere Beauty Group existed on paper. She'd filed the LLC. She'd built the business plan into something polished and real. She had a contact at a small private equity group that focused on lifestyle brands. A woman named Claudette Marsh, who'd seen Dominique's work at a charity event and said words that Dominique replayed in her head for weeks. The market is ready for what you're describing. Come talk to us. Claudette Marsh, 47 years old, sharp as surgical steel, partner at a boutique investment group called Alcott Capital that had backed 3 beauty brands in the past decade, 2 of which had sold to major conglomerates. One meeting with her could change everything. Dominique spent 2 months preparing for it. She didn't know that Trevon already knew Claudette Marsh, didn't know that they'd grown up in the same Decatur neighborhood, that their parents had been friendly, that Trevon had her personal number saved under Claudette M in his phone. Didn't know he'd used it. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday in March at Alcott Capital's offices in Buckhead Tower, all glass and restraint, 42nd floor, the kind of room where money made decisions quietly. Dominique arrived 12 minutes early in a blazer she'd bought specifically for the occasion, her pitch deck printed and bound, her samples in a structured tote. Claudette's assistant met her at reception, apologized, said Miss Marsh had received some concerning information about the business proposal and would not be moving forward at this time. No further details, no rescheduling offered. Dominique sat in the elevator on the way down and did not allow herself to cry until she reached the parking garage. She spent 2 weeks trying to understand what had happened. She sent follow-up emails that went unanswered. She reached out to her contact who'd made the introduction, a woman named Portia Daniels who did PR in Atlanta, and Portia was vague in a way that felt deliberate. There were some questions about the viability of the concept, I think. I'm not sure of the specifics. Dominique went back to her plan. She refined the projections. She reached out to 2 other investors through a small business development network. Both passed within a week of receiving her materials, faster than any genuine review process should have produced. One of them sent a 2-line email that included the phrase, "concerns about the principals involved," which made no sense because there was only one principal, her. She didn't put it together, not yet. What she felt was failure. Plain and total and suffocating. She started doubting the plan itself. Maybe the product line was too ambitious for a first venture. Maybe she should start smaller. Maybe she was moving too fast. She went home and told Trevon what was happening. He listened with what she now understood was profound patience. He nodded. He said, "I've been worried about the timing on this, honestly. Maybe it's a sign to take a breath." He made her tea. He held her. She thought she was lucky to have someone steady. She was sleeping next to the arsonist. The truth arrived on a Wednesday 6 months later, from the last person she expected. Fatima Osei had been Dominique's closest friend since cosmetology school. Ghanaian American, brilliant, blunt in the way that only someone who loves you completely can afford to be. She worked at a salon in Midtown and had her own slow-building ambitions that she pursued with the patience of someone who understood that good things take architecture. Fatima called Dominique at 9:14 in the evening, and there was something in her voice from the first word, a tightness, a weight, that made Dominique sit down before she'd heard anything. "I need to tell you something," Fatima said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you react." Fatima had been at a private dinner 3 nights earlier, a birthday gathering for a mutual acquaintance. Small, maybe 15 people, at a private room in a midtown restaurant. Trevon had been there. Fatima had been late and slipped in quietly and sat at the far end of the table, and Trevon hadn't noticed her. She described what she heard in the measured way of someone who has rehearsed it because they knew it would land like a bomb. Trevon had been talking about Dominique's business, about the meeting she'd had, about Claudette Marsh. He'd been laughing, not cruelly, but in the casual way of someone who considered themselves the smartest person at the table. And he'd said, she had this whole little pitch deck, very professional actually, but she wasn't ready for that room. I did her a favor, honestly. I called Claudette ahead of time and told her some things, saved her the embarrassment of a real rejection later. Someone at the table had asked what he'd told Claudette. Trevon had shrugged. Enough. That the financials had problems. That she had other debts I knew about. That she'd had some issues with a previous employer. None of it matters specifically. Claudette just needed a reason to pass, and I gave her one. The table had laughed. Someone had said, "You're cold, Trevon." He'd said, "I'm realistic." Dominique was silent on the phone for so long that Fatima said her name 3 times. When she finally spoke, her voice was very quiet. He also called the other 2, the ones through the network. It wasn't a question. She already knew. "I think so," Fatima said. "I'm sorry, Dom. I'm so sorry." She didn't confront him that night. This is the part that people find hardest to understand. The ones who imagine themselves in her position and are certain they would have walked straight through that door and torn the room apart. But Dominique Ashford had grown up watching her mother do hair out of the kitchen, and she had learned from a very young age the difference between a reaction and a response. A reaction belongs to the person who provoked it. A response belongs to you. She lay in the bed they shared and stared at the ceiling and made a decision that would take 4 years to fully execute. She was going to leave. She was going to rebuild. And when she was ready, not before, but exactly when she was ready, she was going to make sure that what Trevon Whitmore had done became the most expensive thing he ever did in his life. She didn't know yet exactly how. She just knew she was not going to waste this anger. She was going to invest it. Over the next 3 weeks, she documented everything she could quietly access. Texts she'd seen, the timeline of her failed meetings, the names. She saved it all to a folder on a cloud account he didn't know existed. She moved what money she could from their shared account, only what she'd contributed, not a cent more, into an account in her name only. She contacted an attorney named Beverly H. Reby through a referral from Fatima, a woman who did business litigation and who told Dominique after one consultation that what Trevon had done potentially constituted tortious interference with business relations, a civil claim with real teeth if she could prove the pattern. Beverly also told her something else. Before you consider litigation, make sure you have something to show for yourself. Courts respond to plaintiffs who are standing up, not still falling down. It was the most important advice anyone gave her that year. She stopped picturing the confrontation. She started picturing what came after it. On a Friday in early October, while Trevon was at a weekend trip to Charlotte with his friends, Dominique moved out of the Midtown condo. She took only what was hers. She called her mother and drove to Decatur with her car full and her face dry. Vivian opened the door, took one look at her daughter, and said nothing. She just moved aside and let her in. She made eggs. She sat across the table. Eventually, Dominique said, "I'm starting over." Vivian said, "No, baby, you're starting." She enrolled in a business management course at Georgia State, nights, online, while she worked days at a salon in Sandy Springs, doing the kind of high-end work that kept her sharp and rebuilt her savings. She was not Lumiere Beauty Group CEO right now. Right now, she was a stylist. She did that work with total commitment. She was the best in the salon within 60 days. The clientele followed her. She also started something else. Quietly. She had always been able to make hair. All kinds. The weaves, the naturals, the custom pieces, the full lace units that took 12 hours to hand knot and looked entirely biological. She'd always done them for close clients as a private thing, something separate from salon work. But Fatima had a cousin who worked in wardrobe for a small production company in Doraville that was shooting a streaming series, and the cousin mentioned offhand one day that their wig supplier had just canceled with 3 weeks' notice. Fatima called Dominique. Dominique made 6 units in 10 days. They were perfect. The production company paid her 4 times what she'd estimated. The production coordinator, a meticulous woman named Adais Noachukwu, who noticed everything, looked at the finished pieces and said, "Where have you been?" Dominique said, "Getting ready." Daisy laughed. She didn't know how literally true it was. That single job became 5 jobs within 3 months. Production companies, a photographer who shot editorial work for magazine clients, a theater company in Midtown. Then something happened that Dominique had not planned for. One of the pieces she made for the streaming series ended up being worn by the show's lead actress in a scene that got clipped and went viral on social media. The comments exploded with questions about the actress's hair. The actress, whose name was Renata Voss, a rising performer who'd been building a following slowly for 3 years, posted a story crediting the incredible wig artist who made this, DM her, with a tag to a basic Instagram account Dominique had made almost as an afterthought. The DMs were 500 deep by morning. Dominique looked at her phone in the break room of the Sandy Springs salon and understood that something had shifted in a way she hadn't anticipated. She wasn't ready for this volume. She had no website, no real infrastructure, just skill and a few production contacts and a savings account that was getting healthier but was nowhere near what she needed. She also had Beverly Achibi's voice in her head. Make sure you have something to show for yourself. She wasn't there yet, but she could see it now. She could actually see it. She called Fatima. "I need 6 months," she said, "and I need your kitchen table on weekends." Fatima said, You've had it. You just never asked. She spent those 6 months building the back end of something she didn't name yet. She hired her first assistant, a cosmetology student named Bree Calloway, 20 years old, fast learner, hungry, and paid her fairly from the production income. She developed a production system. She sourced better materials. She built a real website, clean and editorial, with pricing that communicated exactly what tier she operated in. And she started documenting the business with the same rigor she'd brought to the pitch deck Trevon had destroyed. Except this time, nobody knew it existed. There was a reason for that. Beverly had advised her on it. If you're going to pursue what I think you're going to pursue, the less visible your assets are right now, the better. Build the structure cleanly. Keep the ownership clear, but don't announce it. The LLC she filed was not called Lumiere Beauty Group. That name she held in reserve, registered in Delaware, with her mother listed as registered agent, a perfectly legal arrangement that Beverly's paralegal had set up with quiet efficiency. The operating company was called Arche Studio LLC. On paper, it was a production services company. It was technically accurate. It said nothing. Trevon Whitmore, who had returned from Charlotte to an empty condo and sent 7 texts she didn't answer, had no idea any of this was happening. He'd told his friends she'd left because she couldn't handle reality. He'd been saying it for months. He believed it. He was bragging to people. Still, that was the detail Fatima kept reporting back with a kind of controlled fury, that he was out here at dinners and happy hours and weekend gatherings, telling anyone who listened that Dominique was talented but not cut out for the business side, that he'd actually tried to protect her from a bad investment situation she didn't understand, that she'd taken it personally and left. He had turned sabotage into a story where he was the reasonable one. Dominique heard all of it. She stored all of it. She added it to the folder. She was not ready yet, but she was close. 8 months after going viral from Renata Voss's Instagram story, Dominique received an email she almost deleted because she thought it was spam. It was from a woman named Isolde Crane, who introduced herself as the head of talent partnerships for a mid-size entertainment management company called Prism Group, based out of Los Angeles. They represented a roster of about 40 entertainers, actors, musicians, influencers, and they'd had 2 clients reach out asking specifically about the person who'd made the pieces they'd seen credited in Renata Voss's story. We'd like to talk about a more formal arrangement. We think there's something significant here. Dominique read it twice. Then she called Beverly Hb. Is this real? She asked. Beverly looked up Prism Group in about 45 seconds. Very. Do not respond until we talk. They talked. Beverly advised. Dominique responded 3 days later. Not eagerly, not slowly, precisely. They scheduled a call. Isolde Crane was a precise woman with a direct manner and no patience for vagueness, which meant she and Dominique got along immediately. She laid out what Prism was thinking, a preferred vendor arrangement for hair and wig work across their roster, with the possibility of something more structured, co-branded product, eventually, if the relationship developed. Dominique listened to all of it. Then she said, I'll need to come to LA. Isolde said, We were hoping you'd say that. She flew to Los Angeles on a Tuesday in June, 2.5 years after Trevon Whitmore had made a phone call that was supposed to end her before she started. She sat in Prism Group's offices in West Hollywood, clean and modern, with the particular energy of a place where things were actually happening. And across from Isolde Crane and 2 other partners, she presented Arche Studio with the same precision she had once brought to the Lumiere pitch deck, except now she wasn't presenting a plan. She was presenting a track record, revenue figures, client list, turnaround times, quality standards. Everything Beverly had told her to document, documented. Isolde's colleague, a man named Reed Halverson, who handled business affairs, looked at the numbers and said, You built all of this in under 2 years? In under 18 months, Dominique said, while working full-time elsewhere. Reed looked at Isolde. Something passed between them. We want to talk about something bigger than a vendor arrangement, Isolde said. Dominique kept her face steady. Her heart was doing something else entirely. She thought about a hospital waiting room and a cold cup of coffee. She thought about a phone call from Fatima. She thought about her mother's kitchen table and 6 months of weekend work and a man who had told his friends she couldn't handle reality. She thought, "You have no idea what's coming." She said, "I'm listening." If this story already has you feeling what I think you're feeling, that slow building satisfaction of watching someone refuse to stay down, hit like and subscribe. There is a moment in the life of every person who has been genuinely wronged when the world stops feeling like something that is happening to them and starts feeling like something they are moving through. It doesn't arrive dramatically. It doesn't announce itself with music. It's quiet, almost disappointingly quiet, and it feels less like triumph than like clarity. Dominique Ashford had that moment in a conference room in West Hollywood, sitting across from two people who wanted to give her more than she'd asked for. She didn't celebrate that night. She went back to her hotel, ordered room service, and called her mother. Vivian listened to everything. Then she said, "Now don't get ahead of yourself. Finish what's in front of you first." Dominique said, "Yes, ma'am." She finished it. The deal with Prism Group took 11 weeks to close. Beverly Achebe flew to Los Angeles twice and renegotiated 3 sections of the contract with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this before and found it mildly interesting. What emerged was not just a preferred vendor arrangement. It was a formal creative partnership. RK Studio would provide exclusive hair and wig services across Prism's full client roster, with a first right of refusal clause on any product collaborations that developed from the work. That last clause was Beverly's idea. Dominique hadn't known to ask for it. It would turn out to be worth more than everything else in the contract combined. She relocated to Los Angeles in September. Not permanently. She kept her Georgia ties, kept her mother's number at the top of her call list, kept Beverly on retainer from across the country. But the work was in LA now, and Dominique Ashford was not the kind of person who tried to run towards something while standing still. She sublet a clean one-bedroom in Culver City and turned the second half of it into a workspace. She brought Bree Calloway with her, paid her a real salary now, gave her a title, studio director, which Bree printed on business cards and kept on her desk like a talisman. She hired 2 additional technicians locally, both referrals from the production world, both excellent. The work that came through Prism was unlike anything she'd done in Atlanta. The scale was different. The visibility was different. Clients who had stylists with 20 years of industry relationships were requesting Dominique specifically. Within 4 months of the partnership launch, she had a waiting list. Renata Voss, whose viral moment had started all of this, had become something close to a genuine friend. They were the same age, had grown up with similar amounts of nothing, and shared a particular quality that Dominique had learned to recognize in people worth knowing. Neither of them talked about what they were going to do. They just did it, and let the results make the announcement. Renata's career was accelerating in the same period. She booked a major streaming film, then a prestige television series, then appeared on the cover of a magazine that people in certain industries tracked like a weather report. In every interview, every red carpet moment, every social media appearance, she was wearing RK. She never called it advertising. She called it loyalty. The public noticed. The internet really noticed. By the time Dominique had been in Los Angeles for 14 months, RK Studio had outgrown the Culver City apartment twice over. She leased a proper space in Inglewood, warehouse style, well lit, with separate rooms for production, consultation, and photography. She hired 7 people full-time. She had a waiting list with a minimum 6-week lead time for new clients. And quietly, so quietly that it barely registered as a decision at the time, she began formulating the product. It had always been part of the plan. The product line was the original vision, the thing Trevon had killed at its first attempt. But Dominique was different about it now. She didn't want to rush to market. She wanted to be ready in a way that couldn't be dismantled by a phone call from someone who knew the right people. She spent 8 months developing 12 SKUs, a professional extension line, a maintenance and care system, a collection of tools. She worked with a cosmetic chemist in Pasadena named Dr. Yolanda Fitch, a meticulous woman who had formulated products for 3 major beauty brands, and who told Dominique, after their 3rd working session, "You know more about what you want than most of the executives I work with. That's rare." Dominique knew exactly what she wanted because she'd been thinking about it for years, because someone had tried to take it away before she could build it. That kind of interruption either breaks the vision or sharpens it. In her case, it had done the latter. She filed the trademarks. She locked the formulations. She had Beverly structure the intellectual property ownership through a holding entity, clean, airtight, hers entirely. Then she called Isolde Crane. "Remember that first right of refusal clause?" Isolde said, "I've been waiting for this call." The product launch happened on a Thursday in April, at an event in a gallery space in Silver Lake that Dominique had conceptualized down to the last detail. 200 people, editors, stylists, talent, a handful of journalists ADA's Noachukwu had flagged as worth the invitation. No big speeches, no slideshow, just the work, displayed and experienced and demonstrated, with Dominique and her team moving through the room answering questions with the ease of people who knew exactly what they'd made and why. Renata Voss wore a custom piece to the event. She posted one photo. The caption was 4 words. She built this herself. 12 million impressions in 36 hours. The product line sold out its entire launch inventory in 11 days. Reed Halverson called from Prism the following Monday. "We need to talk about distribution." Distribution was a conversation Dominique had been preparing for. She'd already had preliminary conversations with 2 regional beauty distributors and 1 national chain buyer who'd reached out through the brand's website the week after the launch. She sat in Beverly's Los Angeles conference room. Beverly had opened a West Coast office by then, partly because Dominique's business had made it financially sensible, and negotiated with the patience of someone who understood that the right deal was worth more than the fast deal. What she signed 6 weeks later was national distribution through a partnership that put RK products in 400 locations across California, Texas, New York, and Florida, with an 18-month expansion clause. RK Studio was no longer a studio. It was a brand. She renamed the parent company Lumiere Beauty Group 18 months after the product launch. She'd held that name for almost a decade. It had been sitting in Delaware, registered and waiting, like a room she'd been furnishing in her mind the whole time. When she finally attached it publicly, as the umbrella entity above RK Studio, above the product line, above the distribution agreements, it felt less like a reveal than a return. Beverly filed the public-facing corporate documents on a Tuesday. By Thursday, a beauty industry publication ran a brief item, noting the emergence of a new holding company with an unusual portfolio depth for its age. The item mentioned RK Studio and the product line. It mentioned Prism Group. It used the phrase, quietly ambitious. Dominique read it and smiled. She was not quiet. She had simply been selective about who was listening. By the end of that fiscal year, Lumiere Beauty Group's revenue crossed $43 million. The following year, with an expanded product line and a licensing deal she'd structured with Beverly that extended RK's methodology to a professional training program, it crossed 90. The year after that, the year that an industry analyst published a report calling Lumiere one of the most efficiently scaled beauty brands in the past decade, the valuation crossed a number that made Dominique sit alone in her office for a long time before she called anyone. She called her mother first. Vivienne said, "And you started over?" Dominique said, "I told you I was starting." They both laughed. It took a while to stop. She had not forgotten Trevon Whitmore. She had not been obsessing over him either. That distinction mattered to her, and she'd worked at maintaining it. Obsession would have meant he still had power over her direction. What she'd carried instead was documentation and intention, both stored carefully until the moment was right. Beverly had told her years ago to have something to show for herself before pursuing what Trevon had done as a legal matter. She had that now. She had considerably more than that. She flew to Atlanta in the spring. Business reasons, partly, a meeting with a distribution partner in Buckhead, and she had dinner with Fatima, who still lived in Midtown and had built her own clientele into something she was proud of. Fatima updated her on Trevon the way a good friend does, not gleefully, not cruelly, just factually, because Dominique had asked. His distribution management job in Kennesaw had ended badly 2 years ago. Some restructuring that left him without the seniority he thought he'd accumulated. He'd taken a position at a smaller company, then left that one under circumstances Fatima described as unclear but not great. He'd gotten married to a woman named Courtney, a mortgage underwriter, and they lived in a house in Marietta that was a stretch for what he was currently earning. He talked about pivoting to consulting. He had not actually consulted for anyone yet. He still told the story, apparently. The story where he'd saved Dominique from a bad investment situation. The story where she'd taken it personally. The story where he was the reasonable one. Dominique listened to all of it. Then she said, "Beverly's ready." Fatima looked at her. Ready for what? Everything. Beverly Reby had spent 3 years building the file. That was not hyperbole. She had retained a private investigative firm, a boutique Atlanta-based operation that worked almost exclusively on civil matters, and they had, with great patience and methodology, assembled a documented record of what Trevon had done. The calls to Claudette Marsh. Beverly had a former Alcott Capital employee, someone who'd left on bad terms and had no loyalty to protect, who provided an affidavit confirming that a personal contact of the principal had called ahead of Dominique's meeting and provided false information about her financial history and professional record. The second investor who'd passed. A different trail. Same pattern. A phone call from a number registered to Trevon's personal cell. A brief conversation. A pass that came 2 days later. The third. Same. Beverly had also worked with an attorney in Delaware to ensure that the documentation of Lumiere Beauty Group's original filing, predating all 3 investment rejections, was pristine and preserved, establishing that the business idea was legitimately hers, fully formed, before anyone had the chance to interfere. The civil complaint she filed in Fulton County on a Wednesday morning in October, named Trevon Whitmore, personally alleged tortious interference with prospective business relations across 3 specific instances, and attached 11 supporting exhibits. She did not announce it publicly. She didn't need to. Legal filings are public record. A reporter at an Atlanta business publication found it within 48 hours. The story that ran the following Monday was headlined, "Beauty Empire Founder Files Suit Against Former Partner Over Alleged Investor Sabotage." It named Dominique. It named Lumiere Beauty Group, which by then had enough of a profile that several national outlets picked up the story within hours. It named Trevon Whitmore, which meant his name was now permanently, searchably attached to the words investor sabotage in civil lawsuit. His phone, Fatima reported, did not stop ringing for 3 days. Courtney, his wife, the mortgage underwriter, left the house in Marietta 6 weeks after the lawsuit was filed. Fatima heard this from a mutual acquaintance and relayed it without editorializing, because she understood this wasn't about Courtney. Courtney was a casualty of the choices Trevon had made long before she entered the picture, and Dominique felt genuinely sorry for her in the abstract, distant way you feel sorry for someone you've never met who deserved better than what they got. The lawsuit settled 14 months after filing. Dominique's legal team had been prepared to go to trial, and Beverly had communicated that clearly and credibly throughout the process. The settlement figure was confidential. The non-disparagement clause ran in both directions, but only one person in the arrangement had anything meaningful to disparage. What was not confidential was the public record of the filing itself, and the settlement, and the coverage that had accumulated around both. Trevon Whitmore's professional reputation, which had never been as solid as he'd believed, built as it was on the confidence of a man who'd confused not failing with succeeding, had been substantially rearranged. The consulting pivot did not materialize. He started applying for jobs. Lumiere Beauty Group's Los Angeles headquarters occupied 3 floors of a building in Culver City. Not the 1-bedroom she'd sublet at the start, but a proper corporate space 2 blocks away that she'd signed a lease on 2 years ago and had spent considerable attention designing into something that felt like the company it housed. Clean without being cold. Ambitious without being aggressive. The lobby had a single wall of deep green with the Lumiere name in brushed brass, and the receptionist, a young man named Obina, who had a gift for making everyone feel expected, greeted visitors with the exact right energy. Lumiere employed 47 people in LA. It had a smaller Atlanta office, 11 people, including Adais Nwachukwu, who had left production work to run Lumiere's Southeast operations and had turned out to be extraordinarily good at it. The product line had expanded to 29 SKUs. The professional training program had certified over 800 stylists. Dominique sat in her office on the 3rd floor, most mornings before anyone else arrived. She liked the quiet. She liked the particular quality of the light before the building fully woke up, when the city outside was still assembling itself, and she had a few minutes that belonged to nobody but her. She had a driver for certain things. Long days with back-to-back meetings when driving wasn't practical. Late evening events where she needed to be present in the car rather than behind the wheel. It wasn't extravagance. It was math. Her time had a value, and spending it in traffic cost more than the alternative. Lumiere had contracted with an executive transport company called Meridian Group, a professional outfit, good vehicles, reliable. Bree managed the relationship and handled the logistics. Dominique rarely thought about it. She was in Atlanta for the opening of Lumiere's Atlanta flagship salon, a full month of planning, ribbon cutting, press, the works, when Fatima called her the night before the event. "I need to tell you something," Fatima said. The echo of those words, "I need to tell you something," from a decade ago made Dominique's whole body go still. "What?" "Trevon?" A pause. "He's been working for Meridian Group, the car service. He got hired about 2 months ago. He drives executive clients." Dominique was quiet. "Dom." "I'm here." He has no idea. About Lumiere. About the contract with Meridian. He needed work, and he got hired. Dominique looked out the window of her hotel room. The Atlanta skyline. The city where she'd started. The city where she'd been broken open and had found, in the breaking, the exact shape of what she was building toward. She thought about the lobby of Buckhead Tower, the elevator, the parking garage. She thought about Trevon at a dinner table, laughing, saying, "I did her a favor, honestly." She thought about her mother's kitchen. "No, baby, you're starting." She said, "Don't tell him." Fatima breathed. "Okay. I'll be in the car tomorrow at 10 for the event." The next morning was perfect in the particular way that Atlanta fall mornings can be, cool and clear, the light doing something generous with the city. Dominique was dressed and ready at 9:52, standing in the hotel lobby with Bree beside her running through the day's schedule. The car arrived exactly on time. Black, immaculate, the Meridian logo small and tasteful on the window. The driver got out to open the door. He was turned slightly away, dealing with something on the door handle, and she had 2 full seconds to look at him before he turned around. He was wearing the Meridian uniform, dark jacket, white shirt, cap. He looked like a man who had recently lost weight in the way that stress removes it, not effort. He looked like a man who had arranged his face carefully for the professional moment of opening a car door. He turned around. Trevon Whitmore looked at Dominique Ashford and stopped breathing. She watched it happen. She watched the sequence of it. The professional greeting that had been rising in his face falling away. The recognition arriving. The calculation. The panic. The attempt to recover that his face simply could not complete fast enough. She let the silence sit for exactly as long as it needed to. Then she said, pleasantly, "Good morning." He opened his mouth, closed it. Bree, beside Dominique, was looking at her tablet and said, "We're right on schedule." Trevon managed finally, "Ms. Ashford." "We have a 10 o'clock, Dominique said. She stepped forward. He stood aside automatically, reflexively, and opened the door. She got in. He drove. She worked. Bree sat beside her, reviewing the event timeline. The partition between the front and back was down, Meridian's standard configuration for executive clients, and she could see him in the rearview mirror, or could have if she'd looked. She didn't look. She answered emails. She reviewed 3 talking points for the ribbon-cutting remarks. She sent a voice note to Beverly about a licensing question that had come up that morning. She heard him breathing. She heard the particular quality of a person trying to be very still in a moving car. At one point, stopped at a light on Peachtree, she saw him move his mouth and then stop. She still didn't look at the mirror. They arrived at the flagship salon, a beautiful space in Buckhead. As it happened, the neighborhood she'd always planned for, a ground floor location with full glass frontage and Lumiere, lettered in the same brushed brass as the LA office, and there was already a small crowd gathering outside. Local press, industry people. The regional manager Adaes had hired, a photographer. Trevon pulled to the curb. He got out. He came around to the door. He opened it. Dominique stepped out into the Atlanta morning, and the small crowd turned toward her, and someone began to applaud, and the photographer started shooting, and she stood on the sidewalk in front of the thing she had built and looked at what her name looked like on a building. She heard Trevon behind her, still holding the door. She turned. She looked at him directly for the first time since she'd gotten in the car. She let him see that she was fine, that she had always been going to be fine, that nothing he had done had taken a single thing from her that she hadn't rebuilt into something larger. She didn't say any of that. She didn't need to. The building said it. The crowd said it. The fact that he was standing at the open door of the car she'd arrived in said everything that remained. She said, "Thank you." She walked inside. She called Meridian Group that evening. Not to have him removed. That wasn't the point. Had never been the point. She spoke with the operations manager, a practical man named Dale, and said that she'd like to standardize on a different driver for her Atlanta visits going forward. She gave a name Bree had flagged as highly rated. Dale said no problem, and that was the end of it. She had not ruined him. She had not needed to. The lawsuit had handled the professional record. The settlement had handled the financial consequence. The public coverage had handled the reputation. Time and his own decisions had handled everything else. She had simply let him see what she'd become. That, it turned out, was sufficient. Beverly called the following week with news that Claudette Marsh, still a partner at Alcott Capital, still sharp as surgical steel, had reached out through an intermediary to inquire about investment opportunities in Lumiere's next growth phase. Dominique took the meeting. She sat across from Claudette in the same Buckhead Tower building, on the same 42nd floor, in a room that looked exactly as it had a decade ago. She was the same person who had arrived here early with a blazer bod for the occasion and a bound pitch deck, and all the hope that a person who had worked that hard was entitled to carry. She was also not that person at all. Claudette was direct. "I owe you an apology. I should have done more due diligence before accepting what I was told." Dominique said, "Yes. I'd like the opportunity to make that right." "I know," Dominique said. "That's why I took the meeting." They talked for 90 minutes. No apologies were repeated. No time was wasted on the past beyond what was useful. Claudette was still sharp. Dominique was sharper, and knew it, and didn't say so. She left the building through the lobby. She rode the elevator down. She walked through the parking garage. This time, she didn't need to stop. Lumiere Beauty Group continued to grow in the years that followed, in the particular way that things grow when they were built right. Not explosively, not carelessly, but with the steady accumulation of good decisions compounding on each other. The product line expanded. The training program went international. A private equity firm made an offer for a minority stake that Beverly negotiated with her customary precision into terms that left control entirely with Dominique. She moved her mother to Los Angeles. Vivian lived 15 minutes from the Culver City office, in a house with a garden, and she did not do hair out of the kitchen anymore, though she kept her tools. "Just in case," she said. Fatima expanded her salon in Atlanta into 2 locations and eventually licensed the Lumiere training curriculum for her staff. On the day the certification paperwork came through, she called Dominique and said, "I'm going to need a minute," and Dominique could hear her trying not to cry. Bree Calloway was promoted to Chief Operations Officer at 31. She had the title printed on business cards, same as always, and kept them on her desk. Adies Nachuku ran the Southeast region with the same meticulous attention that had made her exceptional in production, and occasionally sent Dominique voice notes about operational inefficiencies phrased so precisely that Dominique forwarded them directly to Reed Halverson without editing. Beverly H.E.B. made partner at her firm and kept Lumiere as her flagship client, which she mentioned in exactly 0 interviews because she didn't do interviews. Dominique was asked, eventually, by a journalist doing a long profile, what she wanted people to take from her story. The journalist, a careful writer, someone who'd done the research and wasn't looking for a simple answer, let the question sit in the air. Dominique thought about it genuinely. "I want them to understand that being wronged is not the same thing as being stopped," she said finally. "Somebody tried to stop me. They didn't stop me. They slowed me down, and in slowing me down, they accidentally made everything I built stronger, because I had more time to get it right, because I understood, by the time I was ready to move, exactly what I was building and exactly why. The journalist asked if she'd forgiven him. Dominique was quiet for a moment. Forgiveness isn't really the frame I use. I made a choice very early not to let what he did decide what I was going to do next. That's different from forgiveness. That's just not giving someone the satisfaction of defining you. She paused. He bragged to people that he'd saved me from myself. He believed it. He built a whole story around it. She looked at her hands, the hands that had sectioned and braided and crafted and built. The story corrected itself eventually. Stories usually do, if you're patient enough to let them. The profile ran with a photograph taken outside the Lumiere flagship in Buckhead. Dominique standing on the sidewalk in front of the brushed brass letters. The Atlanta morning light doing something generous. She looked like exactly what she was. A woman who had started. If you watched all the way here, you already know what to do. Like, subscribe, and drop in the comments. What was the moment you knew Dominique had already won? Because I think you knew before she did. Next story drops soon. You don't want to miss what's coming.